I'm Sloane. My brother looked me in the eye at his engagement party, the one I planned, the one I paid for, and said, "We talked it over. We don't think you should be at the wedding." I didn't throw my champagne glass. I didn't make a scene. I just smiled, set down my drink, and 2 days later I called the venue and got my $9,000 back. But that wasn't the part that broke me. What broke me was finding out they'd been passing around a group chat about me for months, deciding I was too much, while I was still writing deposit checks with their names on them. So let me ask you something. When is the last time someone let you pay for something they were building without you? I found out about the engagement the way I find out about most things in my family. Not from my brother directly. From a photo my aunt posted on Facebook with the caption, "So happy for these two. Wedding bells coming soon." I was at my kitchen table eating leftover pasta when the notification came through. I stared at it long enough that the screen dimmed. Then I typed a congratulations comment under the photo, closed the app, and sat there wondering why he hadn't called me first. My brother Elliot and I had always been close, or at least I thought we had. He's 3 years younger than me, which means I spent a significant portion of my 20s being the one who figured things out first. I co-signed his first apartment lease when his credit was non-existent. I lent him money twice, once for a car repair and once for a situation with a former roommate he still doesn't like to talk about. When he got his first real job offer in Charlotte, I drove 7 hours with him to help him move in. We didn't fight. We sang badly to the radio and ate gas station sandwiches, and I helped him assemble a bed frame that came with instructions written in 3 languages, none of which were helpful. So when his fiancée, I'll call her his future wife, entered the picture, I tried. I really did. I drove down to meet her twice in the first 6 months, brought her flowers the first time, a nice bottle of wine the second. She smiled a lot but said very little, and when she did speak to me directly, it always felt like she was answering a question from a script. Polite without being warm, present without being there. My brother never said anything was wrong, and I never pressed. The engagement happened in March. By April, they'd set a date the last Saturday of October, and by May, my brother called me, finally, directly, and asked if I wanted to help with the wedding planning. His future wife's family was contributing something, he said, but they were stretched then. He didn't ask me directly for money. He didn't have to. I knew what the call meant. I'd been answering that call my whole life. I said yes, of course, because he was my brother and I loved him, and I thought this wedding was something we'd be building together. I started with the venue deposit, $9,250. The event coordinator, a no-nonsense woman with a clipboard and very organized spreadsheets, told me they'd need half up front to hold the date, the other half 30 days before the event. I wrote the first check in May. I have a photo of the receipt on my phone. I took it because I wanted to remember the moment I did something real for my brother. After that came the caterer consultations, 3 of them, because his future wife had specific ideas about the menu. She didn't love any of the first 2 options. The third one worked, and the contract for that went through me as well. Then the florist deposit, smaller but not small. Then the rehearsal dinner venue, which his future wife's mother suggested and which her family graciously agreed to help coordinate, meaning they showed up to 1 meeting, nodded at everything, and left. I was also the one who found the photographer, negotiated the package, and handled all the email chains because Elliot was busy with work and his future wife didn't respond to emails in what she called a timely way. I didn't mind. I'm organized. I'm efficient. I'm good at this kind of thing. And I told myself that what I was building was not just a wedding. It was something that would matter for decades. Something he'd look back on and know I was part of. In July, I flew down to Charlotte for what was supposed to be a cake tasting and dress shopping day. His future wife's 2 bridesmaids came. I was not asked to be a bridesmaid. I'd noticed that quietly, but hadn't mentioned it. The day was pleasant enough on the surface. The cake was good. One of the bakeries had a lemon option that everyone agreed on. But I kept noticing that when decisions were made, no one turned to ask what I thought. It wasn't rude exactly. It was more like I was an assistant who'd been invited to tag along. Present? Useful. Not part of the inner circle. I drove back to my hotel that night and sat on the edge of the bed for a while without turning on the TV. August was the month I should have paid attention to. Elliot called less frequently. When I texted about vendor updates, he responded with short messages, sometimes hours later. His future wife had stopped responding to my emails entirely and started going through Elliot, who then relayed her answers back to me like I was a contractor submitting reports to management. I told myself it was pre-wedding stress. I'd read enough about wedding planning to know it turns people inside out. Then in late August, I sent a cheerful group text to both of them asking if they'd confirmed the rehearsal dinner headcount. No response for 4 days. On the 5th day, Elliot replied, "We're actually handling the rehearsal dinner differently now. Her family is taking care of it. No explanation. No thank you for the hours I'd spent on that. Just a pivot, delivered like a memo." I wrote back, "Okay. Just let me know what you need from me." I didn't hear back for 2 weeks. September arrived and I started noticing things I couldn't explain away. My name disappeared from the planning email thread. I only realized it when the florist CC'd me on a change and I saw the original recipient list. I'd been removed at some point and no one had told me. When I mentioned it to Elliot, he said it was probably a mistake and that he'd look into it. He never brought it up again. A week later, I got a message from a college friend who'd stayed connected with some people who knew Elliot's social circle. She didn't send it to be cruel. She sent it because she thought I already knew. She'd seen a photo from a dinner, some gathering I hadn't been invited to, with a caption from one of his future wife's cousins. Something about the wedding, something about the family, something with the phrase, "keeping it intimate and intentional." Under the photo in the comments, "So glad you guys finally made some of those tough calls." His future wife had liked the comment. I read that 3 times. Tough calls. I sat with those 2 words for a long time. That night, I went looking. I'm not proud of it, but I went looking. His future wife's Instagram was public, and I scrolled back through September, August, July. There were photos I hadn't seen. A dinner in late July that included both families. A brunch in August tagged Bride Tribe. An engagement photo shoot in September posted with the caption, "Our People." I wasn't in any of them. I hadn't been invited to any of them. And then, halfway through scrolling, I saw a comment left by one of her bridesmaids under the engagement photo shoot. Finally, the real family showing up. Real family. I put my phone face down on the counter and stood very still for a minute. The next morning I called Elliot. He answered on the second ring, which surprised me. He sounded tired, or maybe braced. I asked him directly, "Am I invited to the wedding?" The pause lasted long enough that I already knew the answer before he spoke. He said they'd been thinking about it, that his future wife's family was larger than expected, that they were trying to keep things manageable. That it wasn't personal. He used that phrase twice. It's not personal. I didn't raise my voice. I asked if they'd made a decision. He said, "We think it might be better if you weren't there, just for the day itself." Like the day itself was a minor detail. Like the day itself wasn't the entire point. I said I understood. I didn't hang up dramatically. I just said I had to go, and I went. For about 2 hours I did nothing. I sat in my living room with a cup of coffee that went cold and I stared at the window and let it land. My brother who I co-signed a lease for, lent money to twice, drove 7 hours for who I had just spent 4 months and a significant amount of my savings helping prepare for the most important day of his life. My brother had just told me I wasn't welcome to witness it. Then slowly, something in me got very quiet and very clear. I opened my laptop and started a document. I titled it simply, "What I Paid For." Venue deposit, first installment, 4,625. Caterer contract deposit, $2,100. Florist deposit, $780. Venue deposit, second installment I had not yet sent, $4,625 still outstanding. That last number I starred, because I had the wire transfer scheduled for the following Friday and I hadn't sent it yet. I picked up my phone and called the venue. The coordinator answered, the same woman with a clipboard, and I explained that I needed to discuss the contract. I asked about the cancellation and modification policy. She walked me through it calmly. If the second installment hadn't been processed yet, I could redirect the reservation, transfer it to a different name, modify the booking, or in certain cases, receive a partial refund depending on timing. I told her I wanted to put a hold on the second installment while I sorted out some details. She said she'd make a note. After I hung up, I sat quietly for a moment. Then I opened my banking app and deleted the scheduled wire transfer. The $4,625 stayed in my account. It sat there like a question that had finally been answered. I didn't call Elliot. I didn't text his future wife. I didn't post anything. I just documented every receipt I had, every email, every contract where my name appeared as the paying party. I built a folder. I labeled it with the date and saved it in 2 places. What happened next, I didn't plan exactly. But I didn't stop it either. 3 days later, I called the caterer and explained that I was no longer coordinating the event and would need to be removed from the contract as the billing contact. I asked whether the deposit I'd paid was refundable under the circumstances. The caterer's office manager checked the contract terms. Because we were still more than 60 days out and I was the original signing party, they could process a partial refund, 60% of the deposit back to me. I gave them my account information. Then the florist. Smaller but the same conversation. The arrangements hadn't been finalized. I was still in the system as the primary client. They released me from the contract and refunded the deposit in full. I kept meticulous records of every call. Timestamps. Names of who I spoke with. Confirmation numbers. I want to be clear, I was not acting out of spite. I was acting out of clarity. I had paid for things as a member of this wedding. I had been informed I was not a member. The logical conclusion was that my financial participation should end where my invitation did. I didn't notify Elliot. I didn't send a message explaining what I'd done. I went about my week. I went to work. I meal prepped on Sunday. I watched a show I'd been meaning to get to and didn't feel guilty about it. The call came on a Tuesday evening. I was folding laundry when his name lit up the screen. He asked if something had happened with the vendors. His voice had that specific careful tone people use when they already know the answer but want to hear you say it first. I told him the truth. I said I had canceled my involvement with the contracts I'd entered into as a member of the wedding party. I said that since I was not going to be present at the wedding, I didn't think it was appropriate for me to remain financially responsible for it. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Sloane, those vendors are expecting a certain plan." I said the vendors had been properly notified and released from their agreements with me. If he and his future wife wanted to rebook, they were welcome to. He said his future wife was upset. I said I was sorry to hear that. There was a long pause, and then he said something I didn't expect. He said, "This feels like a punishment." I thought about that word, punishment. I turned it over. I said, "Elliot, you told me I'm not welcome at your wedding. I'm not punishing you. I'm just not paying for something I'm not part of." He hung up, not violently, just hung up. His future wife's mother called the next morning. I let it go to voicemail. She left a message that was polite on the surface and pointed underneath, something about family and hard decisions and, "Surely we can work something out." I saved the voicemail. I did not call back. What I hadn't anticipated was the message I received that Thursday from someone I'll call my brother's future wife's cousin, not someone I knew well. We'd met once at the engagement party, but she sent me a DM that started with, "I just want you to know I saw what they said in the group chat and I don't agree with any of it." I asked her to tell me more. She screenshotted a thread and sent it to me in pieces. It was a group chat among the bridal party and close family, one I had obviously never been added to going back to June. In it, there were multiple messages discussing whether to include me in the wedding at all. His future wife had written several of them. The words she used were clinical almost. She makes things about herself. Every conversation circles back to what she's done for Elliot. I don't want her energy on our day. And then one message that stopped me completely. Elliot had written it. He'd written, "I know. I just need to handle the deposits first, and then we can deal with the rest." Handle the deposits first. I read it 4 times, not because I didn't understand it, because I needed to let myself understand it completely. He had known for months what the plan was, and he had waited, deliberately, consciously, until the financial commitments were in place before telling me I wasn't welcome. I set my phone down on the kitchen counter. I didn't move for a few minutes. I wasn't crying. I was past crying. What I felt was something older and quieter than grief. It was the specific exhaustion of a person who has just watched something they suspected for a long time finally become undeniably real. I went for a walk. It was a cool evening, the kind of October weather that smells like wet leaves and fireplace smoke, and I walked further than I meant to. I ended up at a park 3 blocks past where I usually turn around. I sat on a bench by a small pond and watched the light go flat on the water. A kid nearby was throwing bread at ducks with complete commitment, and I sat there watching him do it until my phone buzzed with a text from a friend asking if I was okay, which meant word was probably starting to move. I walked home slowly. That night I did something that felt administrative rather than dramatic. I compiled everything into a single email. The receipts, the contract copies, the confirmation numbers from the refunds, the original payment screenshots. I wrote a short, factual note at the top. No anger, no adjectives. Just, here is a record of what I contributed financially to the planning of this wedding, and here is a record of the refunds I have received. I addressed it to Elliot and his future wife and CC'd myself on a secondary account, and I hit send without rereading it. The subject line said, Financial Summary, Wedding Contributions. After that, I closed my laptop and made chamomile tea and did not check my phone for the rest of the evening. The responses came in waves. Elliot called twice that night. I didn't pick up. His future wife sent a text the next morning that was the longest message she'd ever sent me. I read it once and didn't respond. Her mother left a second voicemail. And Anne texted me, then walked it back with a sorry wrong person follow-up that was not convincing. The cousin who'd sent me the screenshots sent another message. They're panicking. Just wanted you to know. I appreciated that. The following Monday, I got an email from the venue coordinator. She had received a call from the bride and groom about the second installment, and she wanted to let me know the status of the account. Because I had not completed the second payment, the booking was now technically on hold. They had 30 days to either complete the payment under a new billing arrangement or forfeit the date. She CC'd me out of what I can only describe as professional courtesy. I replied to thank her and asked her to remove me from the account going forward. She said she would. I don't know what happened with the wedding after that. I don't know if they found another venue. I don't know if the date held. What I know is that a Saturday in late October came and went, and I was not there, and I was not in a car on the way there, and I was not lying awake the night before wondering if I packed everything. I woke up that morning, made coffee, and drove 2 hours to the mountains alone. I'd booked a small cabin months earlier for a work trip that fell through and never canceled the reservation. It seemed like a reasonable place to be. I hiked for 3 hours on a trail that was more difficult than the description suggested, and I ate lunch on a rocky overlook, and I didn't take any photos because there was no one to send them to, and somehow that was fine. The mountains didn't care who I was or what I had or hadn't been invited to. They were just there, enormous and indifferent, and I found that more comforting than I expected. On the drive home that evening, I stopped at a gas station and bought a terrible cup of coffee and a bag of those orange peanut butter crackers and ate them in the parking lot with the windows down. It was a good day. In the weeks after, a few things filtered through the way they always do in families. Not from Elliot, but from the periphery. His future wife's cousin reached out one more time. She said the wedding had been scaled back significantly. A different venue, fewer guests, a simpler setup. She said his future wife blamed me for ruining the planning. She also said, without me asking, that some of the family had started asking questions. Why hadn't Elliot just handled the deposits himself from the beginning? Who had actually been managing all of this? She said, I think people are realizing something they should have asked earlier. I thanked her and told her I appreciated her being honest with me. There was one other thing. About 3 weeks later, I got a card in the mail. My brother's handwriting on the envelope. Inside was a short note on plain paper, not a card. He wrote that he was sorry for how things had happened. He didn't say what specifically. He didn't say whose idea it was. He didn't promise anything. He just wrote that he was sorry and that he hoped I was doing okay and that he knew things weren't right. I read it in the kitchen, standing up. Then I folded it and put it in a drawer. Not the trash, the drawer. That difference felt important to me. I haven't spoken to him since the Tuesday phone call. I don't know what happens next between us, and I've stopped trying to predict it. What I know is that I spent years being useful to him in ways that felt like love, and somewhere along the way, I confused the two. Being needed isn't the same as being valued. Being present isn't the same as being seen. And I can write those sentences now without feeling like I'm performing something, because I mean them. I learned them the hard way, the way most true things get learned, If you've ever been the person keeping someone else's story together while quietly being written out of it, then you already know what I'm talking about. That specific moment when you stop and realize that you have been contributing to something you were never actually invited to be part of. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't arrive with a speech or a confrontation. It just shows up one afternoon in a document called What I Paid For, and you sit there with the number in front of you, and you make a choice. I chose myself. Not loudly. Not perfectly. Just finally. If this story landed somewhere real for you, tell me in the comments. Tell me if you've ever been the one holding everything together while someone decided you weren't worth including. And if you're in the middle of something like this right now, I want you to hear this. Your worth is not in your deposits. It never was. I'll see you in the next one. Here's what I figured out about the way things tend to go. Not in some cosmic sense, just in a practical human one. The things we do quietly accumulate. Every decision leaves something behind, and eventually what you've been doing in silence becomes louder than anything you could have said out loud. Elliot didn't think I'd follow through. I know that now. He wrote in that group chat that he just needed to handle the deposits first, which tells me everything about how he saw me, not as a sister, as a resource to be managed on a timeline. He assumed I would absorb the information, feel hurt, and keep paying because that's what I'd always done. I'd always absorbed it. I'd always kept going. 17 years of being the older one, the capable one, the one who figured things out and handed the solution to someone else and called it love. That pattern didn't start with the wedding. It started long before, and I let it. That's the part I had to sit with. The part that was harder than any of the phone calls or the refund conversations or the Wednesday I spent building a folder called What I Paid For. The harder thing was admitting that I had participated in my own erasure by making myself so quietly indispensable that no one ever had to ask if I was okay. They just assumed I was fine because I kept showing up with the answers. There's something that happens when you stop doing that, when you stop being the solution. The first thing that happens is panic, theirs, not yours. Because suddenly something they never thought about, never examined, never credited, is gone. And the absence of it reveals how much they were counting on you without ever counting you. I don't think Elliot is a bad person. I think he made a series of choices that followed a logic he never examined. That I would always be there. That I would always absorb the cost. That love meant showing up with no questions and no conditions. And when his future wife's voice became louder than his own conscience, he chose the easier thing. He chose to manage me instead of talk to me. People do that. It doesn't make it less of a betrayal. It just makes it a very human one. What I keep coming back to is this. Intelligence, the real kind, isn't just about knowing things. It's about being willing to look clearly at what's actually happening, even when it's painful. I had the information for months. The unreturned texts, the removed email thread, the Instagram photos I wasn't in. I had the data. I just kept translating it into something more comfortable. That's not loyalty. That's avoidance dressed up as kindness. And real strength. Not the kind that performs resilience for other people, but the kind that actually holds you up, comes from being honest about what you will and won't accept. Not loudly, not dramatically, just clearly. I didn't yell at Elliot. I didn't send a long emotional message explaining how hurt I was. I made phone calls. I kept records. I withdrew my name from things that were no longer mine to carry. That's what I want to pass on, if I'm passing on anything. You don't have to set anything on fire to stop enabling something that's hurting you. You just have to get honest about what's happening and then act accordingly. The cause and the consequence are always connected. Elliot waited to tell me until the deposits were in place because he thought that gave him leverage. What it actually did was ensure that when I acted, my actions had weight. He created the terms. I just enforced them. The morning of what would have been his wedding, I was on a trail in the mountains, eating crackers in the parking lot of a gas station, and I was okay. Not triumphant, not bitter, just okay. That's the quietest kind of freedom, the kind nobody posts about, the kind that doesn't need an audience.